Welcome to the TimeScape EDM Plus series of videos. My name is Mark, and today we're going to look at the first example of using Microsoft Power BI with TimeScape providing data to do some data quality analysis. So I'm already signed into Power BI online. So what we're actually seeing here is we're looking at data quality for three types of asset. So we have equity, FX rate, and treasury, and we're doing a number of tests on those. We're looking at gaps where there's data missing. We're looking at spikes where the data changes by more than a certain percentage day on day, flat spots where the price hasn't changed from one day to the next, and statistical outliers where the price is more than plus or minus 2.5 standard deviations from the mean. We can actually see that in the three sets of tests we're doing, we're actually using different parameters because the data may move slightly differently for each type of asset. So we need to fine-tune the parameters to get the sensible levels of error. So if we first look at equity, then at the bottom there we can see that there are consistently the same number of gaps as one might expect. This may be due to holidays, for example. But we can also see for Alcoa, for example, we have quite a large number of flats and quite a large number of spikes. Or if we look at Procter & Gamble, then there we can see that we actually have quite a few outliers. So we have different types of error, which implies that the data is moving in slightly different ways. If we now look at FX rates, we can see that these are dominated by flat spots, and we can also see that typically the emerging market currencies, maybe the values aren't quoted very often, so these may be typically flatter than other types of asset. And the G20 currencies like EUR or GBP or JPY, relatively speaking, are have much less flat spots than maybe the emerging market ones. And then finally, we can look at treasuries, US treasuries in this case, and we can see that there are quite a few spikes in this case, a few flats and a few outliers. But what's actually interesting is if we drill down into those treasuries, we can see that most of the noise is actually attributed to those bonds which expire in 2015. That might well be due to the fact that they're more sensitive to short-term changes in interest rates. Our second example is we're looking at the data vendor spread between two vendors. So in this case, we're looking at the differences between the ask price, the bid price, and the mid price from two different vendors in terms of percentages. And once again, we can see that some of the emerging market currencies have a little bit more spread than perhaps the G20 ones do. But even then, if we look at something like Korean won, we can see that those spreads are still fairly small, only fractions of a percent. So as one might expect, the FX rate data quality spread between multiple vendors is in fact quite small. This may not be true for different attributes for different asset classes, but certainly for FX, then these spreads are actually relatively small. Our final example, returning to the equity data. In this case, we're actually going to look at the physical data so we can actually see where those erroneous points actually were. So if we return to Alcoa, then what we see on the bottom chart is the blue chart is the actual price data, and then at the bottom we can see where the flat spots are. We have little black spikes. Where the spikes are, the little red spikes, and for the outliers, they're yellow. So if we look at the first flat spot, we can see that's 9.92 on the 15th of January 2013, and if we look over to the right, we can actually see on the 15th of Jan 2013 there is in fact a flat spot. So if we look at Procter & Gamble, as we saw in the earlier example, this has not many spikes, but it has a few flats and more outliers. So it's a different kind of movement for the outliers case than the day-on-day change case. So if we look at what we've looked at in the example, then we have the single vendor data quality, where we're using one data vendor, and we're looking at a variety of tests over 3 types of asset, in this case equity, FX and treasury. In the second example, we were looking at the differences in values between the ask bid and mid prices for FX rates between 2 data vendors, and we saw that they were fairly small. And in the third example, we're able to actually look at the actual equity price history and actually see precisely where those erroneous points were. Thank you for your time.